Firstly, just welcome everyone to the chat tonight. Hopefully some of you attended the discussion with Jeff and Jenny a few months ago. The whole idea is that tonight we're going to be moving along from that discussion and discussing first speech strategy and starting to develop a call book. Just to introduce myself, my name's Sam Mackay. Together with Jenny and Jeff Woolley, who's not here tonight, we lead the NZL Sailing Youth Program. And tonight we're also lucky to be joined by Paul Snow Hansen for this discussion. For those that don't know Paul, I'm sure many of you do, but Paul's a 3-time Olympian in the 470 and just recently got back from the Paris Olympic Games, where he was the IQ foil coach for Vela Den Haag. So yeah, great to have Paul on the call. And the reason that Jenny and I were quite keen to have Paul on the call is he's definitely an expert in this area. Dan Wilcox and himself, his crew, did a lot of work in this space in the lead up to the Tokyo Olympic Games. And I think they did a really nice job of laying out some of the key things to think about when looking at first speech strategy and developing call books. So yeah, thanks, Paul, and looking forward to hearing what you've got to say to the group. So cheers. For those that didn't hear me just before, we're keen to. It's great to see so many of you guys registered for the discussion. Could everyone please pop your name, where you're from, and the class that you sail in the chat? Yeah, it'd be great to learn more about you. If at any point through the presentation you've got any questions, I'm going to be sort of running the admin for the discussion, so I'll look through the chat and I'll try and find the appropriate moment to ask any questions that you might have. And of course, we'll come back to them at the end. Cool. Was that I control the slide there, Jenny? Or do you? Thank you. It's you. Yeah. Cool. So here's just a bit of a refresh from the last discussion that Jeff and Jenny led on starting routines and planning. So some pretty good points here, and I think what I want to highlight is this it flows really nicely into the discussion tonight, because you can have the best start routines and good plans, but if it's not linked into your first speech strategy, it's probably not going to be the right routine or the right plan. So having that connection is obviously pretty key, and hopefully from tonight's overview you'll have a clearer idea of what you want to achieve for a given start based on the given conditions for the day. So yeah, quite a cool follow on. We'll jump up to the next slide, please, Jenny. And just before we kick off the discussion, we also wanted to highlight this diagram. This diagram is what's called our campaign blueprint. And it simply just tries to outline all the different skills that you need to have to be successful in our sport. The beauty of this is the simplicity. Obviously, it's pretty clear, easy to follow, but I think, as you all would appreciate, there's so much depth behind each of those headings. And yeah, tonight we're just going to be sort of touching on one of the buckets, that strategy bucket. And I guess one other thing to think about, which you'll understand at the end, is strategy or call book development actually has a lot of crossover with many of those other headings, and it's all quite integrated. So yeah, just thought we'd highlight that as a bit of a starting point. Jump over to the next slide, please. Cool. So I'm now going to hand over to Snowy and Jenny and throw to them the question, what is a call book and how do we use it? So over to you guys.
Yeah, wicked. This is the first time I've seen this slide myself, so just taking it in a little bit. Looks wicked. Nice job, Jenny.
Thank
Very
you.
cool. Yeah, so what is a core book? So for me, after discussing with these guys a little bit more, it's basically it's a tool, and it's a tool or a guide that we can use. Um, the the simple truth is any race has got a few key priorities, and getting that before the rest of your competition has it is one of the keys to doing a really good regatta. So if you can beat the competition to knowing like what type of day it is, it's just like a very strong thing to have, and we can really help ourselves with having a call book which gives us a very simple outline on how to get straight to the priorities on any given day. And I can see in this slide here that it's got a whole lot of the examples that we'll go over in a bit more detail. So a call book is also, it's a process, and it's something that the creation of it can really consolidate some of your knowledge and sort of highlight some gaps. So my call book should look different from your guys' call book. If you're new to the sport, having it very empty is just totally fine. And then as you get more and more experience, it should change and evolve. And sometimes after a long time, it is going to be really simple, because just one little statement will mean so much to you, and you'll understand it so deeply that you only need one or two headings, and it means a lot to you for a given day. What about you, Jenny? What's a core book in your eyes?
Well, I was just thinking, I was going to ask you a question actually. And I know in the 470 you had a very highly developed call book that you'd worked for years over. But now you're winging. Can you just transfer that to the winging, or does it need to look different, or
I
are you
think it
starting from
needs to.
scratch, or
I think it needs to start totally again, because I think again, like the process of creating the core book is where I would get the most out of it at this stage, because ultimately I'm an amateur wing foiler, and for me to like consolidate some of my thoughts in different conditions would allow me to then sort of try it out on the weekends and the small races and see if that is true. And I've done so few regattas that I think for me to use my 471, I would think that there's nothing in it that I could actually execute at a high level, so it would be completely irrelevant. So I would happily create a new one, and it would be really simple, and I'd probably want to like talk to a few people or share it with possibly some of my sailors and get feedback from them.
yeah, cool. So you haven't seen the next slide, but I'll put it up because I think you've got a really good example of when the call book helps you. Does that look familiar, Snowy?
Yeah.
Did I get the right days?
Yeah.
See the guy capsized in the background?
Yeah. So in the core book, you've got all these different ways of categorizing your days. One really clear one would just be survival heavy wind. It's a condition where you can really choose how you want to approach it before you even leave the car. I remember waking up in an Optimist, and you'd hear the trees rustling, and you'd feel the nerves down to your bones, and already your approach to the day had started. It had started from the moment you woke up, and the attitude that you brought on the water was something that would ultimately be reflected in the way you race. And I think a cool book in the heavy wind can kind of help you get to where you need to be. And for Dan and I, we sort of wanted this version of ourselves, which was a controlled aggression. I'd sailed in two-handed boats with a few different people, and Jason Saunders, he's actually on the French America's Cup boat right now. His aggression level is like 110%. It doesn't matter what condition almost, he just fully throws himself at it. So he wants to sort of calm himself down and take a bit more of a controlled approach. And me and Dan weren't too bad, but we're happy to sort of like rev ourselves up a bit. The example I can think of is probably my favorite race I've ever done, which was in Italy. And we had these, it looked like the picture basically. It was so windy and we weren't very fast. We had chosen that season to not work on boat speed, accept our boat speed and work on racecraft. So all our debriefing, everything we talked about was in context of just racing well. And we were getting kind of smoked for boat speed, but when it's that windy, it doesn't matter too much. Staying upright, sailing clean. We had a few key points, and part of that is simplifying the race course, like not making it too complicated. And we were the only boat to identify a big shift. So we did a jibe set, and it was sort of 25 gusting 30. We managed to sail the boat in a really controlled way where we both didn't trapeze downwind, but we both sat next to each other right at the back of the boat and we laid through in one. And 2 people broke their masts, and then some of the best guys in the world straight set and found themselves in a huge amount of trouble. We ended up winning by half a leg, and we were so far ahead we started to worry what had gone wrong. But there's anyway, that's just an example of sort of like the approach that we had to the day and just getting the like very, very basic fundamentals right. But also the idea of having like a controlled aggression was just a reminder that we had in our core book. And you guys might be totally different, but I think controlled aggression is generally a pretty good approach when it's windy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was thinking of an example of, sorry, my voice is a bit funny. Racing the Ilka in Wellington. And for me, the key thing was I don't want to jibe. So just bearing away off that top mark and pointing straight at the gate and then turning right and then going upwind. And by doing that, just minimizing maneuvers and minimizing risk was really key for me to
Why don't you want to drive?
Well, because it's hairy. Well, the way I do it, it's hairy.
Yeah.
So that, I guess that's 2 nice examples of where a callbook can help simplify the decision making around the race course. Cool. We'll go to the next slide, which we thought we'd just talk about features and what a feature could be on a course, on a race course. So how might we look at a course and decide if there's any features that are relevant to our racing? Paul?
Well, I think a really good example with features is like sort of imagining your own yacht club. And if you talk to any local in their yacht club, they can tell you off the back of their hand like exactly what it means to race well on their given turf. I'm from Wakatiri, so I know the first thing on that list that I sort of feel very happy that I've got a deep knowledge in is the tide. So at Wakatiri, I can tell you that before I've launched, every time I'll check the tide time. And that's just something that is so ingrained in me. But when you're doing regattas around the country or around the world, you might not know what is the specific feature that is most important. And then there's also just days where you don't know and you actually have to work this out on the fly. There's always that sort of statement where people say it's not normally like this, and all the locals are going for the tide, and it turns out there's a 30-degree wind shift that wins out. So I guess this list here is a really awesome start. But in a very simple way, a feature is something that would make you change your strategy to get a benefit. So we sometimes talk about what side of the course pays. And once you have a deeper knowledge of it, you might say the side of the course paid because of a wind shift or pressure. And that could be because of potentially the geography. It could be because of the wind changing through the day. This sort of ability to navigate the features is something that you should be just soaking up like a sponge off the people around you, because it's the sort of thing where you can't have deep enough knowledge, and there's the best sailors often have the most sort of deep understanding, but also the most sort of agile ability to sort of look up the race course and identify what's going to win that specific day. And what they're doing is they're looking up and identifying the features that they can see. Yeah, that's the way I think about it. But I think over my career, I've been filling in all these little rule of thumbs that apply to each one of these things. And yeah, I've just come back from Marseille, and that was a really, really tricky venue. It was on a call book, you put it under the extreme light conditions. But on the race course, the Marseille Bay was so nuanced where you were in the bay, and there were all these features that you needed to identify. And I'm the first one to put my hand up that it was so hard, and we all made a lot of mistakes. And yeah, it was really, really challenging to work out where the wind was going to bend and where on the course you needed to be. So yeah, it's the features is a great subject, and I encourage you guys to soak up the knowledge from the old salts at the yacht club, your competition, books, anyone. Yeah. It's like the language of sailing to a certain extent. Is that the way you guys see it, Sam and Jenny?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I was thinking, sorry, Sam, is maybe everyone can put on the chat what are the big features at their yacht club where they sail the most? What are the things that are the dominant things that affect your strategy? Sorry, Sam. Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all good. I was just going to share, like we were talking about earlier today, like our home yacht club, what features, just like Snowdon, and exactly what you were just saying. Like I grew up in Napier, and we have the Napier Hill, which when we were doing club racing, would have that an effect in terms of which way you need to go in comparison to the hill. And the older guys at the yacht club racing dinghies like told me where to go, so I just did it. Didn't know for many years why. It's yeah, it was quite interesting. Now it's obviously quite ingrained, but
And a question to you, Sam: when the Opti Worlds were there, how did the New Zealanders think that the international guys were in their own waters? Like, were they able to adapt easily, or
yeah,
any
well,
thoughts about that?
thinking back to that Worlds was a really strange summer.
No.
It was that classic, it's never like this. Regatta was really rainy in the middle of the summer, and I remember it just being quite funky. So I think that probably played into the international sailors' hand a little bit, because it was probably a bit unique to the Worlds team, the New Zealand Worlds team as well.
Yeah, cool. What about you, Jenny?
Yeah. So I sail mostly on Otago Harbour, and the key thing is in the sea breeze is you've just got to bounce off the rock wall. But you've also got to keep in mind that it gets shallow at low tide, so you've got to balance the risk reward with hitting the ground versus getting the benefit from the rock wall. So yeah, you can see there's quite, just in our 3 examples, some really good variety and how important it is to be familiar with the features at the different venues you sail at, and also in the different wind directions. There'll be different features that are more critical than others.
Yeah, wicked.
Cool. All right. So if we go on to how do we categorize the day? How do we figure that out? And we broke it down for simplicity, but what we're saying here, this is just a great starting point for you guys. It may not be where you end up, or it might not be as relevant to your class, but this is a starting point. So we sort of got 5 categories. The first one was light wind. So that very light winds where it's light winds. And then heavy.
Sorry, Jenny, the interesting thing is that's probably a little bit subjective depending on that's kind of leads to Snow's point, but it's light winds for you, I guess, is probably the key point, and depending on the boat you're sailing.
And likewise, heavy winds as well. Heavy winds for you might be 20 knots, or it might be 30 knots. But when you're that heavy breeze, which like the picture in the slide, for me, that would definitely be in the heavy wind category. And then steady wind. So we're sort of steady wind category, where it's a nice onshore breeze. There will be some oscillations, but it's predominantly steady, as opposed to a shifty wind, which is a kind of what we're thinking there is an offshore breeze where it's quite shifty and differences in pressure as well, often as well. And then the last category is random. So that's kind of just when you can't really slot it into one of your Callbook categories, and we'll just set it in random until it becomes more clear later.
Yeah, another way to think about that is probably don't know. Could just say don't know.
Yeah, don't know, not sure. Yeah. Okay, Snow, so shall we kick it off with the top of the pile? So light winds. This is
just going back to that one, I've just got just a couple of little things for the how do we do it. Just a story for what it meant to me. Like how do we categorize the day? Like there was actually like a bit of a system that we used to do this on the water. So each day we had the luxury of having a coach and 2 people on the boat, so me and Dan. And this was something that is going to be different for single-handeds with no coach. But you can probably do this in your own head. But we'd get out to the race course and we'd have a pre-start routine. And part of that routine was to check in with the coach, and Jeff, our coach, would ask one of us what the wind was doing and sort of what category it was. And then he would ask the other person, what does that mean? And it was funny how that was like a really, really hard exercise to do, because we're so quick to say what we're going to do at a very superficial like level, not why. So Jeff would often ask like what's happening in the day, and that person would often say, oh, good start, clear lane. And that's actually not what's happening in the day. That's what we would choose to do. Like that's sort of, we'd kind of got to the outcome we were looking for, but it kind of made us slow down and really have a good look around for those features or for the category that we wanted to put the day in. And we kind of like, we wouldn't go forward until we kind of agreed on what sort of day we thought it was. And that was really good if one of us had read the forecast, like the wind forecast, and the other hadn't, or if one of you had like seen pressure on the left and the other hadn't. It gave us a moment just to sort of pause and really talk about what the day looked like before we got into all the details of how we wanted to race. Anyway, that's just came to mind when looking at this.
And I think he was actually forcing you to think in the moment.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, if you're single-handed and you don't have a coach, this is something you can have a conversation with your mates and other boats as well. So even if you're a single-handed boat, you can still have the conversation with someone and see if you are seeing the same things or learn from each other on the course.
Also in a debrief, like even though it's a bit too late, often you're trying to learn from the day before. So you really want to capture like exactly what happened that day. So if you get to see it again, you're in better shape. Yeah.
Cool. So off to light winds. So this picture here, I don't know if anyone will recognize it, but it was Picton.
Yeah.
At the Nationals last year. I was looking for a light wind photo, so
nice.
So
I did at Opti Nationals and Picton. Big moment for me. Yeah. Peter Burling won it actually.
That guy.
He was all right, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So light wind. This is these bullet points are really, really applicable to most sort of dinghies. So I've been coaching IQ, and we'd have a few different ones which would be evolve staying on the foil a bit more, and these light wind points here are really, really good for all your dinghies. You've got a lot of time in the light air, like too much time. You actually see people getting really restless. So the final point, be patient. That's like a really good grounding message for light air. You've got a lot of time, so you can actually do too much or sort of race ahead of yourself, but being patient is like a very good grounding principle. There's a few little things that happen in the light air. Your boat gets slow when it hits the waves. The wind goes around the fleet. So sometimes keeping the boat moving and getting to the edges of the fleet is a really good strategy. This means that you need to start somewhere that allows you to do that. And sometimes the start line bias, maybe it's only 5 boat lengths, but when you're going that slowly, sometimes that bias can just be what wins you the whole race. So it's really important to get that sort of 5 meters or that 20-meter gain out of the bias. And you can then sort of put the bow down, keep the boat moving. And that would be a really good sort of priority in a lot of boats. The observations, look for new opportunities. I think that's really relevant in the light air because a little gust can sort of double the wind for you. So it's worth a lot. Once it's 20 knots, who cares if you get a gust or a lull? You're already powered up. But in the light air, it's really, really nice to see something. I found, like, for me, light airs came easy to me. So I found that my like temperament was like about right generally. So I didn't have to worry too much about sort of like where I was at mentally. But I would say that there's like a lot of people in New Zealand who get to Europe where this is like their biggest weakness. It's really, really hard to come from New Zealand and compete with some of these guys overseas.
I think, am I wrong, Jenny, that was actually your biggest weakness when you were trying to win a gold medal? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we didn't back it up in Athens. But yeah, it was definitely something we were working on and we improved, but it wasn't something. It didn't turn into a strength at all. It was a average at best skill, and then sometimes you get lucky with the breeze.
Yeah.
Do you think that was like your temperament as a sailor, or do you think it was something else?
I think probably that is the right thing, just not patient enough. Maybe just not being able to feel the right things in that light, the little signals in those light winds. But as soon as it's heavy, as soon as you had my crew on the wire, we were off. So yeah.
Yeah, nice.
All right, so I guess a good segue to go into heavy wind, which is I don't know, for me, I find heavy wind easy because you can muscle the boat around a bit more and attack the race course. So you need a bit more of that aggressive approach to it. But what's it like for you, Paul?
I really like the extreme light and the extreme heavy, and I find all my hard days have been in the mid-range where everyone is so damn good at it. Yeah, I think the sort of the boat handling edge that you can have in the heavy and the light have a lot of similarities. The sort of boat speed, sometimes you can have big differences. So keeping the boat moving in the light air, keeping it moving in the heavy, it means very different things, but the result is that there's someone next to you flogging their sails, going slow, and if you do the right training, you can be well ahead of them. So I think you turn up on a heavy wind day, and if you come prepared, it's really easy to have a good day if you have good boat handling, good speed, and sail a very clean, simple race. And that sounds super easy, but when the gate's coming at you on a downwind and boats are happening, it's very easy to end up upside down. And sometimes it's not the boats you'd expect. I remember London Olympics was pretty windy, and it was the lasers in the 470s that kept on capsizing. The round boats with all the boats around, it was definitely not just the fast boats who were struggling with keeping it upright once it got windy. Keeping the course very like simple. The first race of the Olympics in London, we had a port starboard in 20 knots. Didn't think that would happen, and we got disqualified. So that I didn't do a good job of what I said I'd do. I watched the guy who went on to get the gold medal, Matt Boucher. He hit someone going upwind when he was going downwind. And these sort of incidents just happen in the breeze because you're focusing on keeping the boat upright. So sometimes just simplifying like the maneuvers and other boats, like when you're going to dip a boat, sometimes like your crew might not have seen it, and next minute, like in a two-handed boat, you can end up in trouble quite quickly. And simplifying things, seeing them early, can help a lot. My personal core book in the breeze meant that if the bias was pretty normal and a course was pretty normal, I like to start up the line. And this was because I was on starboard and I could see more of the fleet, and I didn't have to do a marginal cross on port. And I also felt like I could keep in touch with the good guys and see what mode to sail. So I found like once it got windy, I found like a pretty easy way of having a clean race was to start a bit higher on the line. And I found when I was starting near the pin, I might go a bit low mode and get out of touch at times. So yeah, that was my personal approach. Any little rules of thumb you've had, Jenny, over the years?
Oh, I was just thinking another heavy wind on the 470 is, I think we won 2 or 3 races with never putting spinnaker up.
All right.
And that was just an example of just lowering the risk, and that in that terms of that race, that was the right thing to do. So I think it's also in that heavy weather, I think it's really important to know your capability and know how good your boat handling is, and what is you can control under that, and not sort of overextending yourself, because the risk, like you said, of capsizing is on your race is really bad, versus the risk of, say, putting the spinnaker up or not made a big difference, and that meant we won races, and that was at the top level. So yeah, I think it's knowing your capability in those breeze and then playing within that.
Yeah, wicked.
All right. And there's some nice IQ foils for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's Tom Saunders from the Olympics.
Yeah. So this is my weakness. Like personally, I find the steady one really hard. So I had to put a lot of effort into this because it seems too boring. Like I didn't put a lot of thought into it for a lot of years, and I just didn't do very well. But I just thought that there wasn't much to it, which was a bit silly. The amount of sort of nuance is quite high, and I think these points are really, really great. So the boat speed is critical. Like we all know that, but like the subtleties of being able to sail all the modes that you can, that can really help like get you just ahead. The bias of the line can get you just ahead. A clean lane can just keep you just on the front line. So strategy wise, it's got here sailing in clear air and in phase, take your gains. It's all painting a picture that every little meter on the race course is worth a lot. And I think this is all exactly correct. Like it's so good. The hard thing is actually being able to do it, and that's just like really, really, really impressive when you see people doing it time and time again. Simon Cook, I can see Ashton here, so that's pretty cool. He mentioned something which has helped me, which is this sort of concept of the wall, which is like the front boats, you know, like everyone who gets a good start creates sort of this front line. And if you do a big dip in a steady day, you might struggle to get back onto that line. So I've taken that as a little learning that I don't want to be tacking and not piercing through that front line. So it's just a little concept, and I don't expect you guys to resonate with it, but that was like a rule of thumb that worked for me. For me, the big one was getting high modes upwind. That really helped. Sort of higher and slower modes really helped me get like clean air for the whole race course. And the good starts on the bias end, it's like a little point there, but that's just such a huge strength if you can pull that off. Yeah. How about you guys? Yeah, Jenny, would you like a nice steady 12 knots? Would that suit you?
Only if I have a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also important to when we were talking about steady wind today, that actually probably doesn't exist. There's always slight small oscillations. So I think you need to be aware of that as well, because there's always opportunities, and the fact that there's small oscillations and that the fleet's going relatively the similar speed, they're the little details that make the difference in getting to the top mark in good shape. So yeah, I agree. It is tricky, and it's often tricky because everyone's quite good at it. So it's hard to be better. But that's where the skill comes in, and that boat on boat tactics, which we're not going to really talk about in this presentation, but that comes critical as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. So I'll go to the other extreme here, which is shifty wind. And when I think of shifty, like I think of places like Picton, where I think it's always shifty, no matter what direction, or off the East Coast Bays, a sou'wester, and you'll get a graph, kind of something like that. So how would you approach a day like that?
Nice. So on this one, I thought possibly rather than sort of going too deep into it, I thought keeping it on a really, really like surface level, but a good one, was just talking about what a lift attack actually is. So when the wind comes from a different angle, you can point towards the top mark at a faster sort of angle. So if there's a right shift, the breeze is going to come from the right, and then you're going to be able to get to the top mark quicker on starboard. And that seems so basic. Like you're probably feeling like that's way below your level. But Hamish Wilcox was Dan's dad, and that was basically his guiding principle with all sort of strategy. Was he would just tell us when we were quite young, just point the bow to the top mark. So just try, just like when you're in doubt, just like be pointing towards the top mark. And it's such a small detail, but it really is quite helpful. Like if you don't know what's going on, as a rule of thumb, if you're on the tack or the jibe that gets you to the top mark first, that can be really helpful. Now, getting off the line on that tack is where there's some nuances. So sometimes the bias is at one end, and it's really hard to hold on to the lifted tack. So that's where sometimes starting in space actually works just fine, because it's not about that like 2 meters that you get from starting at the pin or at the boat. So sometimes me and Dan found starting just in the middle of the line and getting on the tack that pointed us to the top mark first, that was really, really helpful. So our core book was very simple. It was prioritize the lifted tack and sort of do the sort of the knowledge of if it's oscillating or if it's persisting or if it's geographical. Just get that right, that very basic part right. Is it a side that's going to win, or is it going to oscillate? And just keeping it that sort of that simple, I still feel like that's a huge challenge to this day. Yeah, I probably have already said too much, but yeah, there's a lot of nuances within Shifty Breeze, and there's some amazing sailors at it. So there's a lot you can upskill in this area hugely and get a big gain on your competition. Jenny, any sort of rule of thumbs or sort of concepts that you would put in your call book for if you did another Laser Nationals? Or will you do another Laser Nationals? Are you racing?
Can't tell you, Snowy. But I am still sailing, yes, and I will appear at some stage. But I think for me, when I look at a Shifty Breeze, I think there's two things I want to know is I want to get onto the lifted tack off the start, and whether that's an early tack or onto port or continuing on starboard. That's probably the key things I want to know. And I also want to know what tack do I want to approach the top mark in as well. Is it a starboard approach or a port? And then that will help dictate what I'll do on the next leg. But Sam, we talked about this afternoon, how do I know when I'm on the lifted tack? How can I tell that?
Yeah, I mean, a compass is a very good tool that many people use, and particularly if you're sailing in shiftier breeze that doesn't have landmarks as well, that can be quite difficult, say if you're racing going out to sea. So yeah, I think before your first start and in between the races, you can sail upwind and check your high and low numbers. But if another really simple way might be to, let's say you don't have a compass, is to do a split tack before the first race. And so a split tack is very simply, with a training partner, doing a dip start and heading across on opposite tacks for probably 1 to 2 minutes. 2 minutes is usually a good time, and then coming back across and repeating that, and then just seeing if there's any patterns to the breeze and what it looks like when you're wound up on a tack and when you're knocked, and getting a bit of a feel for it. You can also see quite easily in big regattas when you're looking at other fleets that may have started before or might be on a different league to you. I guess one little bit of like strategy or sort of more tactics actually that I think about when it's shifty is you can easily get caught up sailing the boats around you when it's really shifty. And for me, the thing that I try to remind myself is like head up, looking long towards the top mark and thinking about the pressure or shift rather than the boats around me, because quite often gains and losses are temporary, and it's about the thing that's happening next. It's not, and how you're positioned to get there. And so if you get too tactical, too boat on boat focused with the little gains and losses around you and your group, quite often you can miss the big stuff that's about to come.
Yeah, that's an awesome point.
Yeah. Oh, all right. So the last one was random wind, or don't know, as Sam said. So I guess that's when how would you describe it, Paul?
I think it's cool to bring up the America's Cup when it comes to a bit of random wind, because I don't think the wind was random, but that last day of racing, if you guys tuned in at all, you had this preconception in a lot of boats that the right-hand side of the course was going to be the good side in Barcelona. And so we would put that under probably steady wind, but with a right feature. That's how I would sort of talk about it. And you could hear on that last day, it just wasn't working out. People were doing that and just getting overtaken. So you could hear a bit of frustration on board and confusion. And I think that's when you'd probably see people going back to what they thought would win regardless of the wind. So that's probably in their case, it would be like the match racing tactics, like they should probably not give anyone an inch because they don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, anyway, it was just like really curious listening to the onboard communication and the frustration. So even at the top level, you have great minds all looking at the same thing, still not really agreeing on what exactly is happening out there. Yeah.
Do you think that's why Team New Zealand went hard boat on boat when Luna Rossa caught up on that second beat?
Yeah. I think Pete's got this amazing ability to back himself when he knows a feature's going to work out. And I think they just weren't in that space. So then they went back to like the match racing sort of tactics, and it looked scrappy and they came away with the win. But I think it wasn't so clean. But I think that was the right approach, that once it got tight, not giving you a competition like an inch is quite a good one.
And I think that's a good example. Sometimes it does look messy, and you hear people like that. I think the Sevens girls at the game said, that wasn't a great game, but we got the job done.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not beautiful, but it's just you just got to do what you need to do in the moment to get the job done.
Yeah. So I think you've got your head out of the boat more than usual because you're really trying to work out what's going on. You're trying to identify a feature that is going to be what's happening next. But in the meantime, you're going to have some rule of thumb that you will keep you in the game and get you a good result for your regatta. And often that is a bit more sort of playing the fleet rather than the wind. And then looking at the wind and trying to work out what's going on is sort of my summary. But when in doubt, I think don't do a flyer. Like, don't just end up on a corner because you kind of thought it might work. Like that's probably the one thing that you're trying to avoid, is don't put a high risk when you really don't know what's going on. Like, keep it tight, race other boats, back your skills, and then take the opportunities when they present themselves. I think in the Sail GP, Nathan Outridge is called like the wind whisperer, and he's always the first to identify like the next new breeze. So it's totally a skill set that you can work on, and I no doubt he'll have his eyes out of the boat more than others. It will be.
To be fair, they now have coaches in a coach's booth that can tell them where to go on the.
Oh, yeah, that's helpful.
Cheating these days.
Yeah.
But that actually links really nicely. Tess has asked the question: if there's no lifted tack or obvious favoured side, do you tend to pick a side anyway or go up the middle? I think you kind of just answered that, but I'll put it to you again.
I think where you are in the fleet is really important. You kind of have a few risky parts of the race course. Like, you don't want to come in on a ley line from the corner and if you're a bit far back and the whole fleet piles in on yourself. That would be something you wouldn't want to do. But you can also get a bit caught up in the middle, getting sort of tacking too much and not getting the boat sped up. So I think if I was winning the race, I'd happily sort of win my side, keep it pretty simple. And if I was a bit further back in the fleet, I'd be trying to find really clean lanes. And part of that would be not getting on that ley line too early within reason. What about you, Jenny? How would you answer that question?
I think you did it perfect.
I think just to add to it, I think the reason that you don't want to get on that ley line too early is that you're really vulnerable to your angle going right down, and then everyone gets a free shot at coming back on a lifted tack and passing you. So that's what I guess you meant by turning inside out or going on top of you. But yeah,
I've got a little story of when this happened, because I did the Etchell Worlds as a tactician, and we were pretty slow. And I remember, I've never done races like that. It was like the beats took like an hour just to get to the top mark. We ended up on the ley line with maybe like 10 minutes to go when people were attacking on us. I think that's the longest 10 minutes of my life. I just wanted to fast forward and just get there. I didn't care if I was coming last. Like, I just wanted the pain to be over. There was nothing worse than just having another boat tack and another one. Yeah. I got it. We stuffed up, all right? Yeah, something to be said about having these faster races, because an hour-long upwind was
Careful,
horrible.
Paul. We've got a few Flying 15 sailors here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man.
But I guess that getting on that ley line too early is yeah, you've played all your cards, and your only card is to just go to the top mark. You've got no other options left.
Yeah.
Sammy.
Yeah, I guess just to summarize, I think just a few key points there. I think both Snowy and Jenny have done a really good job of talking through, I guess, the outline of what Paul's call book in particular looks like and how he went about categorizing the day. I guess the key point in summary is that a call book's got to be your, and I guess it's down there as well, living document. So it's got to be something that you develop that gives you, it's a tool that you can use basically that when you're under pressure at a regatta and maybe a little bit unsure of what you're going to be doing, just gives you that grounding of being able to go back to, say, like a laminated sheet, or even just a discussion with your coach, of, okay, as Paul said, I really liked those two questions: what's happening in the day, or I guess what is the category for the day, and then what does that mean? How am I going to sail? So I think it's such a huge tool. The value in a call book, though, is not copying what, say, like anyone could take, Paul's call book, which is obviously a very high level document after 12 years of 470 sailing, or how many years, 3 Olympics. But you won't get that same value. The value is always from creating that document, talking to people, thinking about different venues, thinking about how different features affect a race course, thinking about your boat, like the boat on the screen here. It's a match racing keel boat, doesn't plane. So the priorities in a call book would be very different, say, compared to a 49er, which obviously the speed differences are way different. And the ability to tack might be different and things like that. So I think that's a really key point. The other one is just that it's a fantastic tool to use in your debriefs, because if you've gone through the process of actually trying to categorize each day, and this is every time you go sailing, you have that ability to ask yourself the question, what did I think was going on? And was the plan right? And I didn't execute it if you didn't have a good day? Or was the plan wrong, and why was it wrong? Was I in the wrong category? Did I prioritize the wrong things? And from there, it's a real good learning tool. Like you'll go to different venues, and you'll actually start to summarize things better, and simplify, and add different things in as you need, as your core book evolves. So I think it's got to be a document that you use, that as it says there, living document. It's got to be something that's quite simple as well. Like you're not going to be going on the water with like a 4-page document and reading an essay before you go sailing. It's got to be quite to the point, and maybe there's a bit more detail when you flesh it out, because although Paul's looks really simple when it's outlined nicely here on the PowerPoint, there's so much detail, just like that blueprint, of so much knowledge behind it. Anything else to summarize there, Jenny and Paul?
Probably just that creation of the core book. I just thought, in a team, it's amazing how people use different words for the same thing. So it was really cool, sort of sharing ideas. And it was funny how sometimes people word it differently, and just hearing the way that like your sailing partners think about things can be really helpful once you're in the heat of the moment. Like if you guys can think the same way, it's really, the process of creating it was probably or more than half the gain, I think, for us. So I think we captured it well. Yeah.
And just on that, how long were you sailing before you had a call book? And I guess to a pretty high level, you're probably a world champion, or multiple medalist at a worlds by that point.
Yeah, I think 2019 is when we did that season where we just basically focused on racecraft, and this was a big part of that. Yeah, and we're slower.
I think if you can integrate this from, I think there's some opti sailors on the call, like a very simplified version, I think the amount that you'll learn from each event and each time you go sailing will just be so much more. So I think that's, to me, where the real value is, and it's probably a step up from where junior sailors have, well, any sailor's been for a long time. So quite a step forward, I reckon.
And I think it's a great thing to do. And I think don't be having a little laminated sheet that you just pop in your life jacket that you can just grab out and remind yourself just before the start or in your pre-start routine. I think it's really valuable just to make sure you're keeping yourself on track with your decision making for that race. And I think that's a really good idea too. So if I just thought I'd put this slide up at the end, and yes, who's at the back of the boat there? This is Paul and Dan were you racing at the Olympics, or this was just?
I think this is
beforehand.
We've got a bib on. We're in third place. Oh, too bad, eh?
Yeah.
I noticed it.
Got my gardening gloves on. I'm looking a bit shabby there, eh?
Yeah.
But Paul, I was just wondering. I have a question. Is what would be my first step if I've got all this great information, and how do I start? Like, what would be your advice to our sailors out here to start the process of developing their own call book for their boat?
Well, I think it's probably a good question because you guys brought up I do need to do one for my wing foiling. It's I think the type of days that you've outlined here are such like that's going to be applicable to everyone as a starting point. So the light air, heavy air, steady, shifty. So I think that's a great point, and sort of jotting down what you guys already know and how you would like to race. That's an awesome place to start. That's the only, like, you really just are trying to consolidate your knowledge initially, and then you can have fun with it. So you can share it with people you trust and get feedback. And you might surprise yourself when someone will, like, once you ask people about how they like to race a condition, I'm sure you'll learn a lot of good things, which is what I need to do with my winging. Yeah, I haven't done that before. I'm sailing like it's heavy wind every race. I'm just trying to get around clean. No aggression, just try to make a dry lap.
And then that's probably a really key point there, Paul, is you can have the great, like for your example in your winging, you might have the greatest plan in the world, but if you can't execute it because you can't pack or jibe or stay on the foils, it doesn't
rub
mean
it in, though. Yeah.
Well, just guessing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, like there's quite a lot of chat about moding, and ability to keep clear air and stuff like that. So you might have the best plan in the world, but if some of those building blocks are missing, it becomes pretty hard to stick to a strategy as best as you might try. So I think that's probably a really good point, Jenny.
And I'd just really like to walk away from any day sailing feeling like I've got my head around what really happened that day, and not feel like I'm in the sort of, it's all murky and it could have been this, could have been that. So I'd like my call book to be up to a level that I either know what priority I stuffed up and need to improve, or I would like to like fill in a blank and say, hey, I really need to upskill in this area because I don't know what happened. So I think that's where I'd like to suggest you guys start. So put your best step forward and then see where the gaps are.
Yeah, and if someone sailed well on a particular day, I'm sure if you went up to them and said, hey, well done, you're sailing really well, what did you think were the main things? I'm sure most people are pretty happy to share how they won, how they beat you. So,
yeah. Yeah.
Could be a good way to add to the call book.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a good tip for you, Paul.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Is there any more questions there, Sam?
Not that I can see. Yeah, feel free to add them in if anyone's got any further ones. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap it up, eh?